Grace Family Church. Relationships. What makes them work and how do we navigate them? Catch the naked truth next week. Our night missions volunteers make a huge difference in the city of Durban, so sign up to be part of it. You can get involved in our next Painting Day mission coming up in November. Kids, you'll have way more fun at Grace Kids, so ask your parents to go check you in now. We want to connect with you on social media, so take down our details and say hi this week. Hey, if you're new here today, we'd love to meet you. Connect with one of our team after the service.
Fear is new. unconsciously find ourselves reducing God down to the size of our circumstance? Anybody, or is that just me? There's a song that we're about to sing, and it serves as the most beautiful reminder that He is so much bigger than we ever can begin to imagine. He's so much greater than we can even begin to comprehend. He's bigger than any circumstance, good or bad. And the beautiful thing is, even in His bigness, He makes His home in us. He's intimately acquainted with every detail of our lives, and He's all in for us.
Speak to me when the silence stills my voice. You understand me. You understand me. Come to me in the valley of unknowns. You understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. My soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours, and you are mine. I am yours, and you are mine. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. You're so much bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you
were. God, we acknowledge that the only reason it feels safe to ask things like taking us beyond borders is because we know you're on the other side. Because we know that you're bigger, that you're greater, that you are able, that you are called the I am for a reason. So Lord, in this place this morning, in this holy moment, we just say that whatever you want to do, we are all in. We open our hearts, we open our minds, and say, do in us what only you can do. In Jesus' name we pray. And together we said, amen. Why don't you take your seats? From next week, we are starting a brand new series called The Naked Truth. So why don't you have a look at the screens?
So there we go. We've got a new series starting next week. It's a great one to invite friends, family to, so don't miss out on that. It's a relationship series. We're looking at what it means to be shameless, selfless, and free. So come along to that. But hello, why don't you turn to someone and say good morning, hello, go Boca, all that good stuff. Trust you've had a good weekend. We're going to take up an offering now. If you are new or if you're a visitor with us, please don't feel any pressure to give, but this is something that we do every week. It's a part of our worship. And so I'm going to ask the hospitality team just to hand out the baskets now. And while they do that, we're going to pray. Father, we just thank you that we get to participate, that we are the bride of Christ, that we are your hands and feet in this world. And we just pray that you would help us as the body to each play our part, each play our role, using our time, our talent, and our treasure to make a difference for you far beyond the walls of this church and in our nation and our world. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so just before we get into the last part of our series today, we're wrapping up the Me and My Big Mouth series. I wanted to just kind of have a little bit of a heart-to-heart, a little bit of kind of a family talk, if you just give me the next 2 or 3 minutes, just to let you know about some of the things happening sort of behind the scenes here at Grace. And we want you to be informed. Some people say I shouldn't do this, but I think I'd rather tell you guys and you sort of know where we're at, because we are a family. As much as we run things in a business-like way and a kind of corporate way in terms of our organization and our stewardship, we're a family. And every single one of us plays a part in that. And so I want to just kind of talk a little bit. This is like one of those things where dad sits around the table and says, hey guys, we overspending on the groceries or whatever. And so kind of lean in. If you're a guest, then you can just check your WhatsApps and catch up there. But But this is kind of our budget line for 2019, 2020. We obviously a financial year, March to Feb next year. And so far, just to give you an idea of where we feel like this is a faith-filled budget, but also quite a conservative budget in terms of the economic situation that we're in. But basically, our budget this year so far has tracked along the lines like this. This was in March, we were under budget. Then in April, we were pretty much on budget. Then May, we were grossly under budget, so you can follow the line like that. Then in June, we were kind of under budget again, sort of similar to March. Then in July, just an incredible kind of faithful God blessed us. We had a great month in July. And then August, we were also above budget significantly. And then what's after? September, we were below budget. Okay, quite a bit. There you go. Okay, so that's just, as you can see, really consistent and just, up and to the right. Now, we understand that I don't think that this reality is a reality of something happening in our church so much as it is a reality of something happening in our country. And so we recognize that many churches find themselves in this fluctuating, which makes it difficult, obviously, to budget and plan. But we are trusting God in all of this. But that's just kind of a reality of what's going on. And just to bring you awareness, really, that we really do appreciate those who contribute, those who give regularly. We believe in the tithe. We believe that it's not ours to give. It's rather belongs to God, and we simply bring it as an act of faith and obedience. And so if you are a regular giver, thank you. If you are not, we encourage you to do so, to be part of what God is doing in and through Grace Family Church. Not so that we can, do all this stuff. It's so that we can make a difference in our world. Just a very practical example. This is stuff comes across my desk this week. A young guy who's finishing up his studies, but he doesn't have the resources to finish his studies. And if he doesn't get those resources, he's going to basically not be able to complete his degree. Now, we as a church, we love to help people like that. In fact, we help literally hundreds of people on a monthly basis to pay their rent, to do all sorts of stuff, because we want to make a difference in people's lives. But given this reality, I just simply had to say no to this young man, because I want to steward the resources wisely here as a church. And so this really does land in making a difference in people's lives in a practical way. And so I just want to encourage you, also just to draw your attention, you'll notice that there's some big renovations happening at our Cornubia campus right now. We are busy gearing up there for an auditorium and changing the Virgin Active into the Blessed Virgin and all that. But I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, I just want you to know the money that we are spending doing that does not come from any of this. Okay, that's money that was gifted to us by God by an incredible set of events, and we have about 4 million rand that we have to allow us to be rent-free the first year at Cornubia and to do the renovations, and that's completely outside of any of our regular stuff, okay? And the other thing is that in the new year, we'll be starting to do some significant renovations here at this campus, because a church in the States has a passion for reaching the next generation, and they've given us 1.5 million rand to upgrade our kids' church facilities around here, which I think is really exciting. And so we're going to be building jungle gyms, and the coffee shop will flow out there, and you can come during the week with your kids, and then kids' church space is just going to be the best. So, and again, none of that is part of this regular thing. So don't be like, oh, you see, they're spending all the money, now they just want to... Anyway, okay. Am I done with the dad talk? Okay. So thank you for listening, for leaning in. We're going to wrap up this series today called Me and My Big Mouth. I'm super excited to share with you. I think this message from the story of Joseph is so powerful. But before we do that, why don't you take a look at the screens?
Here's the deal, Dave.
It's Greg.
Yeah, I know it's Greg, Dave. But here's the thing. Ever since I put you in charge of social media, it just really hasn't been working out.
It's not my sweet spot. All right. I'm an accountant.
First of all, you don't have to sign your name after everything. What do you, my dad?
Well, again,
And then I have 6 tweets after that just say google.com. Now, I can't even figure out, what was going through your brain when... Were you trying to Google from within Twitter?
Please don't answer that. Long story short, my little brother is about to graduate from high school. He's got 10,000 followers. I don't know how he does it. No one does. But we're gonna put him in charge of this, okay? So go ahead and send me an electronic mail with the usernames and passwords. Think you can handle that, Dave? Or do you need to write it down on your little pen and paper?
I can handle that.
Okay, great. And then after that, we're gonna talk about your future here at this company. Thank you.
You want an email? I'll give you an email. Oh, that's good. I like that. Dear Hipster Doofus, here are your painfully obvious passwords. You bearded, no good, sneaker wearing. Oh, that's good. I haven't heard language like that since the Navy. Just because Daddy owns the company. Ooh, that's dark. But I like it.
Hey, Greg,
Yeah, Mike.
you know you've been tweeting?
I've been twittering!
Great. But I love this series. The series we're in called Me and My Big Mouth. And I want to emphasize the me and my because the series is not about you and yours or them and their big mouth, right? This is about taking control of our own words and the power that our words carry. And I hope you've been enjoying this series. I know I certainly have. I've been deeply challenged by the things that we've learned throughout this series because this stuff is difficult for us. It's difficult for us. And in week 1, kind of a recap, if you've missed the series, I really encourage you to go back, watch week 1, 2, and 3, because they really do kind of build upon one another, and it kind of builds a case. And so just a recap real quick. Week 1, James, the brother of Jesus, James gives us kind of the bottom line. And it's been the bottom line for pretty much this whole series. And I'm not really sure how you improve on the words that James wrote nearly 2,000 years ago because they really are so powerful. But this is what James says, and we kind of remember this, and we've been doing hand movements around this. Some of you have been practicing this all week. But here's the line that James says, be quick to listen, slow to speak. Quick to listen and slow to speak. And we think that this is a game changer. It's a game changer for relationships. It's a game changer in family. Everyone benefits when everybody does this, that we're quick to listen and slow to speak. And then in week 2, James kind of went a little deeper, hit us a little bit hard, and kind of was pretty straight. And he speaks about the fact that we never really get control of the tongue. He speaks about the fact that the tongue is untamable. That it can never be fully domesticated, that we can never kind of eliminate the risk and it's never safe to ignore our mouth because we never really know what's going to come out of them. It's a threat. It's a threat to the things, to the people, to the relationships that we value most. And then last week, Jess was here, my wife, and she preached. If you were here in this service, she did a fantastic job in the 7:30. In the 9:15, if you were here, you maybe would have heard she actually vomited on stage. How many of you were here for that? Okay. In front of all you lovely people and in front of the online viewers, hello online viewers, she vomited and she's fine. I appreciate all the emails and voice notes and everything that we got from you guys. She's well. She's preaching at Cornubia this morning. It was kind of a 24-hour bug thing. I think Paul did an incredible job. If you were here, Paul stepped up, yes. And just preached the rest of her message and preached the 11 o'clock. And also just to let you know, thank you for your concern. She is not pregnant. Although I do appreciate, yeah. But anyway, so, but here's the crazy thing about that moment. And I wasn't sure if I should tell you the story, but I'm going to, so she obviously has this moment. And the crazy thing is she's speaking about, let no unwholesome word come from your mouth. Right? I mean, she's using that language, fish mouth. You remember I got a picture. I mean, she's talking about. I know it's a gross thing, but that's kind of the point of the language that Paul was using. He says, "Don't do that. That's not cool." And you can take it off now. But while she's saying that, she vomits. And there was a guy in our congregation, and he has been coming to Grace for a while. And he came and shared with me this week, and he was so emotional about it. He just wanted to speak to me and said, "You know what? God really used that moment to speak to me." And I was like, what do you mean, that moment? He's like, yeah, that moment. Because Because he said, he was sitting there, he was thinking, why didn't God just allow this not to happen? Why didn't he just give Jess the strength to carry on and finish the message? But it was almost like in that moment, God said, no, I need you to see this. Because the way you speak to your wife? And the way you speak to your kids? It's gross. And it smells. And no one wants to be around it. And for him, it was like a penny drop. It was like a prophetic moment that God was speaking to him. And he's so emotional telling me, he's saying, you know what, this is changing my marriage. This is changing my life. And I needed that visual. I needed that like strength of that kind of situation to really help me understand how significant my words really are. So here's the thing. Even in those kinds of moments, God is able to use all things together for the good of those who love him. And so I just want to... so that's week 2. Let no unwholesome word come from week 3. Let no unwholesome word come from your mouth. And we spoke about this image of fish mouth. And then Paul kind of gives us another word image. And he kind of says that we should approach every conversation as if it's a construction site. Our conversations are construction site. We can use our words to break or to build. And our words are the building materials. And so how are we using our words? How do people feel when they leave our company, when we've spoken to them? Are we building or are we breaking? And then Paul goes a little bit deeper and he says, you know what? You know why this is an issue for some of you? You know why you use your words to bring harm and not to bring good? It's not because of what's happening around you. It's because of what's happening in you. And Jess used the example Paul used the example of the glass of water with the water in it. And when you shake the glass, the water comes out. And you say, well, why did the water spill? And everyone says, because you got shaken. No, it's not because you're shaken. It's because there's water in the glass. If there was no water, nothing would have come out. Life is going to shake us. And what's in us is going to come out of us. And so Paul's saying, what's in you? What are you carrying around with you? Is it this bitterness? Is it something that happened to you a long time ago? Was it words spoken over you or to you or about you? And now you carry that stuff. It's haunted you and you have become bitter. And Paul says very, very clearly, it's difficult to be a builder if you're bitter. You're not going to be able to use your words to build if you've got a bitterness and resentment happening inside of you. And the way to get rid of bitterness is forgiveness. Forgiveness is both a decision that we make in a moment and it's a process that we walk out over time. Andy Stanley says this, forgiveness is deciding that someone in the past doesn't owe you. It says, I'm going to give someone in the past what they don't deserve so I can give the people around me now what they do deserve. That's what forgiveness is all about. And I love that line from Andy, and this whole series really comes out of Andy Stanley and North Point. But he says, if we can gather up our bitterness and our anger and we can kind of take it to the street and we can leave it there, then we have the potential to become heroes, remarkable, otherworldly in the way that we respond to the circumstances of life and the people around us. And here's the reason this is such a big deal. I mean, you know this already. Hurt people hurt people, right? I mean, we know that that's true, that bullied people have a tendency to bully other people, that neglected sons become absent fathers, that neglected sons become demanding husbands, that abandoned daughters become suspicious wives, and on and on and on the cycle goes. And there is a brand. And you know this because maybe this is your story and maybe this is the story of someone that's close to you. But there is a brand of hurt from the past that brands us with the desire to hurt the people around us. And we sometimes don't even know where it's coming from. But here's the good news. If you do the work, if I do the work, if we do the work of gathering up our bitterness and our anger and getting rid of that, or let me just say this, I don't like to say if we do the work. If we allow Christ to do the work in us. This is not a try harder, because you may have noticed this. If you've been trying harder to be quick to listen and slow to speak, you're very quickly going to run out of that. But with Christ in us, He empowers us and enables us to do these things. And we have the opportunity to become remarkable, to become like Christ. And here's why. Because every once in a while, not for everybody, but every once in a while, and for more people than you might think, And maybe this will be part of your story, even though you can't imagine this being part of your story when you think about your current reality. But every once in a while, what goes around comes around. Turn to someone and say, what goes around comes around. Don't say it like a threat to the other person. What goes around comes around, and the powerless find themselves in positions of power. And the people who hurt you may someday need you. And how you leverage your words when the people who hurt you need you, how you leverage your words in those moments says more about you than just about anything else. Abraham Lincoln says this, nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. How you leverage your words in these moments says more about you than just about anything else. And I want you, and I want me, and I want us to be ready when that moment comes around. And so I'm going to tell you a story that might be arguably the second greatest story ever told. If the greatest story ever told is a story of a God who loved this rebellious race enough to send his own son to pay for our sins, then perhaps the second greatest story is a story that mirrors that same idea, but happened long time before Jesus arrived on earth. And so, if you start reading the Bible in Genesis, it's going to take you quite a while to get to the person of Jesus. But if you start in Genesis, very quickly you'll come across a guy by the name of Abram. Abram who became Abraham. Abraham who God spoke to and said, Abraham, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to make you the father of a nation. He says, look at the stars and you'll have the generations will outnumber the stars. And it took Abraham and Sarah a while for them to see that promise, but eventually they had their son named Isaac, and Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And there's kind of a little family tree here. If you look at the first three lines, it doesn't really look like much of a family, hardly a nation, right? But then Jacob has 12 sons. It's where we get the 12 tribes of Israel from. And now we start to see the birth of a nation, the beginning of a nation, especially in that ancient context and culture. But the interesting thing about this story is that the entire enterprise, the entire promise of God to Abraham, God's goal for what he wants to do with this plan of redemption for the whole world through the centuries would end up hanging by the thread of one person's words. I mean, it's staggering that the entire enterprise could have easily fallen apart based on a single sentence from a single person. Remember, words are powerful. Words are powerful. And that one single person actually was one of Jacob's sons, and his name was Joseph. There we can see Joseph there. See, I just chose the cool-looking one. I mean, he doesn't have his coat on, but there's Joseph. Now, Joseph, if you know the story, if you grew up around church or if you're Jewish, you know the story, but Joseph was Jacob's favorite son because he was the son of Jacob's favorite wife. So Jacob had two wives and he had a bunch of other, I don't know how you'd put it, like a side hustle on the, with other. and here's the takeaway for today. Here's the takeaway. Men, are you listening? Never have a favorite wife, okay? Never have a favorite wife because it's going to cause all sorts of problems. And it caused so many problems for Jacob because he had a favorite wife named Rachel, who had a son named Jacob. And the other 10 sons, Benjamin was a little too young at this point, but the other 10 sons hated Joseph. They resented Joseph because he was their father's favorite. And so as the story goes, the brothers decide, we've had enough of Joseph, we're tired of this, we're going to strip him of his robe and we are going to throw him into a pit. And then they're going to decide what to do with him. And so it says, let's kill him, we're going to kill him, but it says this, but before we kill him, let's go have some lunch. Literally, that's what these guys do. So they throw them in the pit, and then it says, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Now, of course, meanwhile, Joseph is in this pit. He's terrified. He knows how much these guys resent him, and he's not sure what they're going to do to him. He thinks he's going to die. And then it says this, Judah said to his brothers, What will we gain? What good is it to us if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. In other words, if we're going to kill him, let's at least get some money out of it. And so he says that, and then he has this kind of flash of compassion. He says, after all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. Wow, thanks, Judah, you're so kind. And then he takes him out. It says the brothers agree, and they pull him out of the pit. He's terrified. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He sees these strangers. His brothers tie him up, and they sell him to the slave traders. I mean, we've read this story, or many of us have read this story, but just think about that scenario for just a moment. What must have been going through Joseph's mind? I mean, he's 17 years old. He's a teenager. And he's going to be sold to slave. He doesn't know where he'll end up, who he'll end up with, what he'll be purchased for. And he says, he sees his brothers and he thinks, I'll never see them again. I'll never see my home again. And his brothers wave him goodbye and assume they'll never see him again. Then the text continues. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him for the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And then perhaps the strangest part of the story. In fact, this line, this idea is repeated. It's almost the theme of this entire story. In the midst of all this chaos, the author tells us, and the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Now, if you're like me, you're thinking, what do you mean he prospered? If the Lord was with Joseph, then surely Joseph would be at home with his dad, Jacob, and his 10 brothers would be in jail. Because Joseph never did anything wrong. And the brothers had committed this atrocity. If God is with someone, doesn't good things happen? And throughout the story, this is kind of the theme. Over and over, we hear this line, that God was with him. But the amazing thing to me, and perhaps the message for you and for I, and the takeaway is not only was God in some mysterious way with Joseph throughout this ordeal, but Joseph chose to live as a man that God was with. That was the perspective. That was his worldview. And that's a message for someone here today, because you feel like God has left you. And maybe you're in a pit. Maybe you feel like and you're starting to live as if God is not with you. But I'm here to tell you, God never left. He never left. He's with you. And so don't you leave now. The fact that Joseph decided to live as if God was with him in the midst of all of this, rather than God having abandoned him, is quite remarkable. Eventually, Potiphar notices Joseph is a very talented person. He's gifted with administration, so he puts Joseph in charge of his entire household. The problem is that Potiphar was not the only one who noticed Joseph. Potiphar's wife also noticed him. And the text says that she persisted, that she demanded that Joseph sleep with her. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, guys. This is better than, Real Housewives of LA or whatever. I mean, this is, and let me tell you, he's a slave. She's not asking, she's commanding. Slaves don't say no to their masters. Slaves simply do what they're told. But for the first time in her life, perhaps Potiphar's wife hears a no. And she's infuriated. But I love the reason that Joseph gives. He says this, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And again, I'm thinking, God? You mean the God who's done nothing for you lately, Joseph? The God who could have interceded when you were thrown into the pit and sold, but who didn't? You mean the God who stood by? This is the God, Joseph, that you continue to be faithful to? But Joseph holds his line, keeps his faith. And Potiphar's wife, she is persistent. She is absolutely persistent. It says day after day, she keeps trying to get him to sleep with him. And day after day, he replies the same, no. Finally, she's had enough. She's tired of the guilt. She's tired of this rebellious slave, and she accuses Joseph of trying to rape her. Potiphar is obviously angry. He's furious. He has no other choice but to throw Joseph into prison. It says that Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, the Pharaoh's prisoners were confined. And then again, here's this line. But while Joseph was in the prison, the Lord was with him. Now I'm thinking, if the Lord is with you, surely you don't go to prison. Right? I mean, something's wrong here. Aren't good things supposed to happen to good people and bad things supposed to happen to bad people? And if you're faithful, isn't it supposed to all work out? The text says that God showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. To which I say, whoop-de-doo. I mean, if you have favor in the eyes of a prison warden, things are not going well for you. Right? I mean, you're in prison. Surely it's better to be out of prison. But this story and many others in scriptures reminds us of something that I think we all need to be reminded of every once in a while. That bad things have been happening to good people for a long time. That's just how it is. Bad things have been happening to good people for a long time. But here's the truth underneath that. The real truth. And the real truth is this, that God has been with good people in bad times for a long time as well. God has been with good people and He's with you in bad times for a long time as well. Well, eventually Joseph becomes somewhat of the administrative assistant to the warden. He's kind of running the prison. Again, this guy just has a gift of leadership and of administration. It's kind of like Andy Dufresne in the Shawshank Redemption. He starts kind of managing some stuff around the prison, but he's not happy. I mean, he's miserable. Based on the description of the prison, many historians believe that this prison was actually underground. And so who knows whether Joseph was even able to stand in this, when the last time he was able to have the sun on his face or feel the breeze of the wind or just stand outside. And so he wants to get out of here. But as the story goes, Pharaoh, who's the most powerful man in the world, he has his butler and his baker thrown into the same prison that Joseph is in. And years go by. I mean, this is the problem with the story. We read the story in like a few chapters, but this takes place over years and years. And so years and years, he's in this prison. He meets the butler and the baker. They come to know Joseph. And after a while, they both have this vivid dream on the same night. And they're not sure how to interpret this dream, and they think like it's a prophetic dream of their future. And so they know Joseph, and they know that Joseph has had success in interpreting dreams. And so they go to Joseph, and Joseph says, okay, I'll interpret your dream. And so the butler goes first, and he says, this is my dream. Joseph listens, and then he says to the butler, hey, I've got some good news. In 3 days, it's Pharaoh's birthday, and on Pharaoh's birthday, he's going to lift up your head and restore you as his personal butler and wine taster. And the butler's like, yo, this is awesome. He's so excited. But then Joseph says to the butler, this is so I love this because it's so real, it's so authentic. Joseph says, hey, listen, when you get out, please remember me. Please remember me. I'm innocent. I've done nothing wrong. And here I am rotting away in this jail under the ground, in the cell under the ground. Just help me out. Tell Pharaoh, tell someone. And the butler says, of course, if I get out, I'll definitely tell someone and I'll help you get out. Now the baker's listening to all this and he's like, wow, that was good news. I wonder what my dream could mean. And he tells the dream to Joseph. Joseph pauses and he says to the baker, well, your head will be lifted up too. Unfortunately, it will be lifted up off your body. And you're going to be beheaded. I mean, suddenly the story turns into a Game of Thrones episode. You know what I mean? This is Ned Stark. Who knew? And spoiler alert, sorry. Anyway, but I don't understand. I don't know why Joseph does this, but in the time, Joseph doesn't stop there. He actually says this, and then your body is going to be impaled on a stake, and the birds are going to come and eat your flesh. Now, if I was Joseph, I would have been like, hey, listen, bro, baker, you know what I mean? I'm not too sure on this whole interpretation thing. Let's just sit on it a few more days and just see, like, hey, hang in there, buddy, But sure enough, 3 days later, one of them is beheaded and impaled, and the butler is restored. Now, put yourself in Joseph's shoes once again. You've been in this prison for years. The butler gets out. He says he's going to remember you and tell someone about you. And so you think, maybe today's the day. I'm going to get out. Maybe today's the day. And then 1 day goes past, and 2 days goes past, and 3 days goes past, and a week, and 2 weeks, and a month, and another year. And the text says, the scriptures say that the butler completely forgot all about Joseph. So here he is again. Some of us, maybe that's your story right now. Maybe you feel like you're forgotten. And another year goes by, and another year goes by, and another Christmas, and another. You're still single, still lost, still depressed, still confused, still lonely, still sick. For all Joseph knows, for all he knew, this was his lot in life for the rest of his life. But it says that the scriptures say day after day after day, he continued to live as if God was with him. I mean, it's really quite astounding. Fast forward. Joseph is now 30 years old. Remember when he arrived in Egypt, how old was he? 17. It's been 13 years. And Pharaoh has a series of dreams, and he's so disturbed by these dreams. They're so vivid that he believes somehow they meant something for the future. And so he tries to get his counselors and his magicians and his court to kind of understand what the dreams are, but no one can interpret the dreams. And then the butler remembers. He remembers Joseph. He says, hey, you know what? I knew a guy years back that I met in prison. Remember when you sent me to prison, Pharaoh? Ha, 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 let's not talk about it. But it was a minor thing. Anyway, so now I met this guy, and I don't even know if he's still alive. I don't even know if he's still there, but hey, maybe he can interpret the dream. And so the text says, Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. And when he had shaved because he was a mess, and when he had changed his clothes because he smelled like dungeon, he came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I've heard it said that of you that when you hear a dream, you could interpret it. Oh, this is Joseph's moment to impress the Pharaoh, to kind of, but what he says next is, probably the most courageous phrase ever uttered in the history of anywhere. He says, the Pharaoh says, I'm going to tell you my dream. But before he can even tell the dream and get it out, Joseph is already responding. This foreigner, for whom as God has done nothing for him lately, says to the most powerful man on the planet, he says, I cannot do it. I cannot do it. But God. Say, but God. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Now, this is so important because this was political. This was challenging. Because basically, you remember, Pharaoh was God. In fact, he had people who every day their job was to whisper in his ear, you're a God. Like Caesar, you're a God, you're a God. And Joseph is basically saying, hey, you know what? You're a little g God. But my big G God, he can do this. And most of the court would have probably gasped at that point, like, oh, Joseph's going to end up on a stake. Here we go. But the Pharaoh is so excited to hear if he can do this. He says, okay, go on. And he says, here's the dream. And he explains it to Joseph. And Joseph pauses for a while, and then he begins to explain to Pharaoh everything in detail about what those dreams actually meant. And I don't want to kind of tell you in too much detail, but basically what the dreams meant was, it was a sort of a future prediction that there would be 7 years of absolute plenty, of harvest, and then 7 years of famine, of a devastating hunger and drought. And so not only does he interpret the dream, but then he does something unthinkable. He actually begins to give Pharaoh advice. And again, the courtroom must have moaned because this kid still smells like dungeon. And here he is telling Pharaoh what to do. No one speaks to Pharaoh like that. But Joseph says, here's what you need to do. During the years of plenty, you need to store up grain. Take 20% of the grain, build granaries and cities, and store up the grain. No one will even care because they'll have so much grain. And then when the drought comes, when the famine comes, don't give the grain back to the people. Sell it back to the people, and you'll become even richer. Of course, Pharaoh thinks this is a great idea. He's leaning in. In fact, the scriptures say the plan seemed so good to Pharaoh and all his officials. So Pharaoh asked him, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. And he makes Joseph the prime minister of Egypt. I mean, this is incredible. I mean, this is a proper position. This is not like Prime Minister of England where you get handed the Brexit, the dummy pass. You know what I mean? This is real power. And so Joseph gets to work and he prepares the nation. He builds the storehouses. He builds the granaries. He chooses the city. He organizes the whole thing. And for 7 years, they tax the grain, they store the grain. And then when the rain ceases and things get really bad, in fact, they get so bad that people forget the good years, they start to then sell the grain back to the nations. And the drought had spread so far north now that it actually had reached the area in which Joseph's family was living. And so it says this, Jacob and the family. So it says this, when Jacob, Joseph's father, learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? I love that. Why are you always looking at each other? We're starving to death. I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. And so the brothers load up and they head down to Egypt, and the stage is set and the fortunes have been reversed. What goes around comes around. Genesis 42. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold the grain to all these people. So when Joseph's brother arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And as soon as Joseph saw them, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger. And so he recognizes his brothers, but his brothers don't yet recognize him. And you know why they don't recognize him? Because he walked like an Egyptian. I apologize for that one. I couldn't resist. That's a very bad preaching joke. But anyway, he walked like a... No, they didn't recognize him because he's 30 years old. And the last time they saw him, he was a 17-year-old scrawny kid who'd been thrown down a pit. Now they're speaking to the second most powerful person on the planet. And so here's the question. Here's the point of all of this. Here's the question we all have to wrestle with. And if some of you may be wrestling with this right now, but some of you will be wrestling with this in the future. And I want us to be ready. We've said that words determine the quality and the destination or the destiny of our lives. Do you remember that? But what happens? What do you do when you've got the power and your words determine the destiny of your enemy? Of those who've hurt you? Or who have said those things about you, or accused you of things that you know you didn't do. What do we do then when things turn around, when what goes around comes around? And this happens to us more than we realize. When your wife knows she's wrong, and you know she's wrong too, what do you do with your words? When your colleague who's messed up and you were the one who said, I don't do that, now you have the opportunity to say, I told you so. What do we do? When we hold the power, when the person who left your gym or left your whatever comes back, what do you do? What happens when you've got the power and your words determine the destiny of someone else? And let me just give you a clue. I'll tell you what's going to happen. Because the answer to this question of what you're going to do, what will happen, what we'll do, depends upon what we did with our bitterness and our anger. Because it's what's inside of us, not what's happening around us. What you do when things were said to you, or over you, or like Joseph, about you. The answer to the question of how we'll respond depends upon what we did with our bitterness and our anger. And if we're still dragging that stuff around us, if we're still carrying that stuff inside of us, then we will respond, and then we will be like the people that we don't like. That's how we're going to respond. It's going to come out of us if we don't deal with it. Back then. Back to the story. As his brothers are bowed down before him, I'm sure Joseph, I'm sure he had flashbacks. I'm sure he remembered those nights with the Ishmaelites, the slave traders, hearing them laughing around the campfire, wondering, where am I going to go? What's going to happen to me? The prayers that were unanswered. Standing on that auction block, stripped naked while people walk around you, poking and prodding, determining what you're good for, how much you're worth. Being lied about a crime you never committed, thrown into a dungeon once again. And there before him are the men responsible for all of it. What's he going to do? The future hangs in the balance. And to be honest, if you can read the story. The next 3 chapters, Joseph does toy with him a little bit. He says, oh, you're spies. And he says, no, we're not spies. And then he makes them go back and fetch Benjamin and bring them back. But eventually Joseph kind of breaks. And it says that he could no longer control himself before all of his attendants. And he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And now imagine this moment. 13 years in the making, Joseph says to his brothers, I am Joseph. I am Joseph. And then the text says this, and then they wetteth themselves. It doesn't actually say that. I added that, but I think that's what happened. That's King James. Or at the very least, their bowels released. You know what I mean? Because they expected him to do unto them what they had done unto him. And let me tell you, with one word, words are powerful. One word Joseph could have said, 10 stakes outside, impaled his brothers. But Joseph used his words to do something else. He said, is my father living? He asks of his father. He doesn't even know what's happened. But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified in his presence. But they did not need to be terrified in his presence because Joseph had lived as if God was with him during his absence, and he had learned how to keep bitterness at bay. Have you learned that yet? Have you learned that yet? Or when you have the upper hand, do you use your words to bring death? Remember, words are like stones. You can use them to throw, or you can use them to pave the way forward. How will you use your words? You'll look under the seats. We're going to wrap things up, and while we do, you look under your seats, you'll notice there's a stone under every seat. We're trying to get like Oprah now. Starting small. I feel like my stones are smallest. Anyway, there's a stone, and these stones, they represent your words. And I'm going to ask you to do something towards the end of when we close, but before you do, I just want you to hold that stone in your hand and let it be a reminder of the way you speak to your family, the way you speak to your kids, the way you speak to the people around you. Just hold those words in your hand. This is between you and God. But think about this. I mean, Joseph could not have known. What he could not have known was that God's plan for the ages dangled by the thread of what he would say next, of his words. Because before him sat the 10 tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel, through whom which God would introduce the Savior of the world, Jesus Christ, who would do for the world what Joseph ultimately did for his brothers. He would forgive them. Because he didn't carry around a bag of bitterness, a sack of anger, even though he had every reason in the world to. And here he has the brothers stand up. He says, get off the floor, don't bow. He says, go home, get dad, get the family, get your grandkids, your kids. I want to know them all, your kids' names. I want to know what's been going on. I've been missing out. I'm going to send so much grain, more grain than you'll ever need. And when you come back, I'm going to send an escort. And then I'm going to look after you. I'm going to care for you and your families for the rest of your lives. And that's what he does. It says the brothers came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? And I wondered about that line because I thought, what does that line mean? And I'll tell you what it means. Joseph is saying, I refuse to play God. You see, here's this. You'll never experience the good that comes from the bad unless you recognize that God was with you during the bad and then refuse to play God when things are good. Can I say that again? It's so important. You will never experience the total good that can come from the bad that you might be in right now, unless you live during those hard, tough years as if God is with you and then you refuse to play God when things are going well. Your words are powerful. I'll close with this. Joseph said, you intended to harm me. But God is bigger than that. And God was silent, but God was not still. God was at work. He seemed like he was far away, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives of which you and I are part. So then, don't be afraid. You're not my slaves. I won't execute you. I will provide for you and your children. And then he reassures them, and it says he spoke kindly to them. Those who would have him thrown into a pit, and he responds with kindness. I can't even speak kindly to my kids. It's astonishing. And his words of kindness and his words of compassion changed the course of a nation and ultimately the course of human history. And here's the thing. One day, maybe one day soon, you may have the power over the person or the persons who took from you, who hurt you, who stole that first marriage, who stole your childhood, who stole the opportunity for you to raise your children, and you don't know what's going to come around. And in those moments, you'll remember what they took from you, and you'll remember what they did to you. And in that moment, your Heavenly Father is going to invite you to remember something else as well. He's going to ask you to remember who was with you. And in that moment, you and I, we have a decision to make. When we've got the power and our words determine the destiny of our enemy, of someone else. Will we pay them back? Will we use our words to throw? Or will we use our words to pave a new future, a new way forward? And who knows what God can do with your words? Who knows how God can use words to change your life, to change your marriage, to change your situation, to change the lives of others, maybe even to change the entire nation. He's done it before and he can do it again. So let me remind you, your decision, my decision, on how we respond in those moments will not be determined by what's happening then. It will be determined by what we do between now and then. It will be determined by what we do with the anger and the bitterness that is inside of us. And I hope that we will take our cues from the one who gave his life for us, Jesus. Not from the ones who took life from us, for the one who was with us, not the one who abandoned us. And if you do, and if I do, and if we do, then in that moment, we will be like our Father in heaven, and we will be free. I'm going to ask you to stand. Now, we're going to kind of blur the ending a little bit, and I'm going to give you kind of a few options. You've got a stone in your hand that you're holding. You can just head on out. You can take the stone with you on your way out. Don't throw it at anyone in the parking lot, please. But you can go with that and maybe put it somewhere in a place that you can remind you of the power of your words, how you're going to use your words. Otherwise, if you'd like, you can bring the stone as kind of a symbolic gesture. And we have a little road marked out here, and you can take that stone, and instead of throwing it, instead of using it as a symbol of letting go of bitterness and of anger and resentment, just lay that stone down somewhere in the midst of this road. You can put it somewhere else if you want, but the OCD in me says, please put it inside the marked area. You can just lay your stone down and you can walk out. You can pave a road with your words. And we're going to play a song. It's about the power of our words. It's kind of a little bit more upbeat because I want you to leave with a sense of, man, we can change life. We can do something good here with our words. And there'll be people up front who pray for you. You don't have to be a member here to be prayed for, but we'd love to pray for you if there's something you're wrestling with. And then you can go. So in your own time, you're not going to rush it, but you can make your way, pave the road. Otherwise, take the stone. Be nice. And let's use our words to build and not to break. Amen? Let's pray. Father, we thank you. We thank you that no matter where we are or where we've been, you never leave us and you never forsake us. You are with us. You are with us in the pit. You are with us in the dungeon. You are with us when we sit on the throne. You are with us. And we want to live our lives as if that is true. Because it is. That you are with us. Help us to use our words like Joseph. Not to wound, not to get even, not to pay back, but to pave the way forward. We ask this in your precious name. Amen.